Hey, hello friends, welcome to this Flutter tutorial, and today we're going to be creating this login screen using Flutter. We'll be using some cool widgets like material, text input, the buttons, in this case raised button, and we'll be creating these sort of circles with some opacity in the background. We'll be using the stack widget to stack the elements on top of each other, and there's a lot of cool stuff coming up your way. So let's get started. Okay, so now we are in the blank Android Studio project that gives you a main.dart file where you can write all the code in the library folder. This is the basic structure of an Android a Flutter app that is created using Android Studio. In the main.dart file, I'll be writing the code for the application. So let's get started. First of all, I'll import the material.dart file. Then I'll be creating the void main function. In this main function, I'll be adding the run app. Sorry, I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, so in this main function, we'll add the run app method, and I'll be creating a new material app. In the material app, now I'll be adding a title of login app. So this title won't be displayed anywhere in the application. I'm just giving this for the sake of just demonstration. So I'll be adding the home to this called home screen. Now we'll be creating this home screen. So new class home screen extends a stateless widget. So I'm just creating the stateless widget because just for the demonstration. In real life, when you're creating some sort of home screen that takes the user input, you do want to validate that input and change the state of that particular page accordingly. So in most cases, you'll be having this as a stateful widget. So I'll be adding the missing overrides now. So for the root root widget, I'll be adding the scaffold. In the scaffold, I'll be adding the body tag. For now, we do not require any app bar in this application, so I'll be directly going to the body tag. In this, I'll be adding a container. So in the demo that I showed you earlier, we do have we have the background of the application filled with a blue color. So that is a container that takes the width and height of the screen. So for getting the width of the screen, we'll use the class media query dot off and give it the context of the application and dot size dot width. So using this command, you can get the width of the screen and the height of the screen using the same method, height. Okay, so for the sake that we can see the container in the emulator, I'll be adding the colors.blue, and I think blue was the color that I displayed in the demo also. And when I save it, yeah, the reloading completes, and we can see that the emulator is having the page open that is completely filled with the blue color. That is the container with the width and height of the screen. Okay, so now we'll be adding a new child to the container, and we'll make the child center because we want all the elements that we'll be adding the username input, the password input, and the login. We'll want them all to be in the center of the screen. So I'm keeping the root child of the container as center, and for this I'll be adding a new child, and this new child will be another container. So the idea is that in the whole app that you have opened on the device, this whole portion, okay, I'll draw this again. Okay, so let's say this is the device that you're using. So in this device, this whole portion the whole screen. This is the screen of the device, so the whole screen will be filled with the root container that will be having the width and height of the screen. So in this, at the center of it, we'll be having another container that will contain the username field. The password field and the login button. Okay, so with this structure in mind, when I create the new container, I'll give it the width of 400, the height of 400, and a new child. So in this child object, as you can see, when we have created this sort of diagram of the layout, so as you can see, sorry, let me just erase this wrong type of input field, and I'll just create this again. Okay, so now you can see that for the username, the password, and the button, all these elements are fashioned in a column. So we'll be adding a new column here. And for the children property, we'll be adding a new text field. Okay, so text field is another widget that is provided to you by the Flutter SDK. This is for getting the user inputs. There are various other widgets also that can help you to get the user input, but text field is the simplest to use for this sort of tutorial. Okay, so for the text field, we'll be adding a new so in this we'll be adding a new style. For the style, we'll be using text style. So all the text in the text input fields will be styled according to the properties here. So we'll give it the font size of 20 and the color of colors.white, so we can see the text. Okay, so now as I save it and I run it on the emulator, so you can see that there is the input field, and when I type it, you can see that the text is being displayed here. So okay, so we'll style the text input field again. So as you can see that the text input is sort of transparent in this whole background, so we'll wrap the text field with another widget. That is the wrap with a new widget, that is the material. So the material widget helps you create new widgets of your own. The material widget gives you access to a lot of material properties like elevation and all. So you can add your own widgets as the child. So I can here add a container as a child, and then which further contains the text fields or buttons or anything else. So the material widget is like of a core widget if you want to create your own sort of widgets that follow the material guidelines. Okay, so in the material, I'll be adding an elevation of 5, along with we can also add the color, the background color. We can keep this orange, a deep orange, colors.deep orange, and let's save this and see how it looks. Okay, so you can get the idea of how material, adding this material, elevation, and color can change the text field dramatically. Okay, so I'll go back and I'll add some sort of border to this to make it feel more round. Okay, so in this border, there is a property in the material called border radius. So for the border radius, I'll be adding a new border radius .all. So this all will help us provide padding, circular radius on all the edges of the material. So for this radius, I'll be giving it a new radius circular that will be of 10.0. And I'll save it, and you can see that all the edges of this material are having this sort of border around them, that is the rounded corners. So for the text fields, there is also decoration. which does require an object of input decoration. So I'll be adding the input decoration. In the input decoration, I'll be adding the color, the fill color of colors.white. So the background of the input field will be of the white color. So when I save it, you can see that nothing happens here. So why is this? So when you set the fill color of the input using the input decoration to the text input field, so it does not take any effect because there is another property called okay, so I need to add a comma here. There is another property called filled. So this property takes a boolean. So you want the input field to be filled or not. Okay, so in this case we want our input field to be of the white color. By default it takes it is transparent and it does not take any color. It will display what the color is of the background, right? Like we were having the blue color in the text field, like that was of the container. So we want this to be true in this case. And when you see it in the emulator, you can see that the whole of the text input is of the white color. Okay. Okay, so when I click on this, you can see that we can't see anything in the input field. That's because we have set the style of the text to color white. I need to add a font color of colors.black. So now the font style will be taking this property, and you can see that the hot reload changes the data that we already entered, and it reformatted that, restyled that to a black color. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to add we don't want the input field to take up whole of the space of the screen. So in this case what we can do is for this material icon, we can limit this whole material icon to have a certain width, and that is by using the container. So I wrapped the material with a container and I provided with the width of I say 400. No, 400. I'll say this 300. Okay, so when I save this, you can see that the input field is shortened to fill that space. And the column, for now, if you can see that the column is taking not aligning the elements in the center of the container. We have a container here, but the column is not arranging the elements in a good way. So for the column, we'll be adding the main axis alignment, and we'll set the main axis alignment to center. And when I save it, you can see that the input field is in the center, and when I press anything, it is displayed in the black text. I don't know why I'm just closing the application again, so I'll just run this from here. Okay, just delete the text. Okay, so now we have some idea of how our elements will be displayed on the screen. We have a text field, and now what we want to do is we want to add some icon here. The text field itself does have an icon property, but I don't like to use it much because it's kind of buggy in some ways, but there is a better way to do that. So in the material, in the child, we'll be adding, instead of the applying the text field directly, so we'll be taking this text field out. We'll be adding a new row with children property, and I'll be adding the text field here. So now in this row, I'll be adding a new element of icon that will take icons dot, in this case we want this to be a person, the person username, so I'll just use the person icon. And now you can see that when I reload this app, there is nothing. It's all on the material app. So why is this? Because we have the text field here, we have the icon, but it does not have enough space to display them both here. So for this, I'll just be, for the sake of it, let's say if I increase the size of this to 400 and I save it again, it is reloading. I'll add the color to the icon, colors.white. Sorry, colors.white, and it still doesn't show anything. I guess I need to increase the, okay, let's see what's the problem. So when I change it to column, you can see that everything is being displayed here. So this is the size issue, obviously. So we'll set it to row again. So for the text field, we'll be adding another container, and I'll set the width to 200. Okay, so actually the problem was that in the text field we were covering more area that we're able to display in the row. So we'll decrease the size of the container again. We'll keep this 300. And now you can see that the text field is being displayed with a background, a white color. That is the background of the input decoration that we applied. So as you can see that the row is kind of stacking all the elements on the left hand side. The icon is there along with the text input, and all the area on the right hand side is just empty. So this is not really a good way. So for this we'll be adding another property to the row. We'll set the main axis alignment. As you hopefully you know from the previous tutorials, that for the row the main axis is always the x-axis. So we want the main axis alignments to be space between. So what this will do is that it will take the input field to the extreme right, and it will take the icon to extreme left. So we'll be having this sort of effect here. So now we can see that we have way too much space here than what is actually required by the icon. So I'll decrease the overall width of the container. I'll decrease this width to 250, and we'll save this and we'll see. Okay, so now the icon is kind of like taken to the left hand side. So we want to add some padding to the icon. I'll just wrap the icon around the padding with the padding, and I'll save this, and you can see that the icon is sort of having a padding from the left hand side and the right hand side, and so now as you can see is that we have an input field. We have the icon with the sort of deep blue color in the background. That is the color of the material. And we have an input field with a background color of white. But we have the rounded corners in the material, but we don't have them in the input field. So this is because the input field is being displayed on top of the material, and for some reason it does not take into account the corners of its corners are not being limited by the material. So we want to add the same radius, the border radius, to the input field also. So in the input decoration, I'll be adding the border with a new outline input border that will take a border radius, and we'll be adding the same border radius that we have on the material. So when I save this, it will be adding a border to all the sides. So to limit the border to the top right and the bottom right corner, we'll not use the all property. Instead, we'll just copy this radius dot circular, and we'll use dot only. So for the top right, we'll be adding the radius, and for the bottom right, we'll be adding the same radius. So when you reload the application, you can see that the text input is having the border on the top right and the bottom right corner, and it does not have any border on the left hand side of it. So right now you can see that there is sort of the size of the input field is feeling a bit short than the material. This is because it is not quite visible here, but if I just change the color of the background container to where is it, the color of the background container to white again, and I save it, you can see that the input field is having sort of a blue border around it. So the basic input field, when you create it, it does have a default color for its border. Okay, so at this point we are having a problem here, because if we just set the borders of the input decoration to none, that we cannot provide any sort of border to any sort of border radius to the input field. So to tackle this problem, I'll just cut all of this from here, and we will be wrapping this. I'll change the color to blue again, and we'll be adding some padding around this. Add padding for 8 insets, and you can see that the text input field has moved between the material, and it does have a border of orange because it is being padded by 8 around padded by 8. So in the container we'll be adding the border radius. Okay, we'll be adding the decorations to the container. In the decorations we'll be adding box decorations. So box decoration is another type of decoration that we can use to apply certain more aesthetics to the container or any other widget that uses decoration. So in this we'll be adding a border radius, and we will be adding the border radius of this again. Okay, so when I save this and the reload is over, you can see that the container is also having that sort of rounded corners, and I'll just add the color of white, colors dot white, so it does match the color of okay, so while I'm using the decorations in the container, I cannot use the color property explicitly. So I will have to add the color to the decorations, and I'll set the colors dot white property to it. And when I run this, you can see that the input field does not alter the borders of the whole container, the whole material itself. One more thing, we are seeing this underline here. So for the decorations, so for the borders, we'll add input border dot none. Okay, so when I save this, you can see that all the lines are gone, all the bottom lines that were being shown in the input fields are gone, and now we have a clean sort of input field here. So for the rest of the tutorial, we can copy the same code and we can paste it again, but this is not really considered a good practice when you're creating such complex applications where you want to reuse the widgets again and again. So what we want to do is we want to take this whole text input field, that is this code here, and we want to take this to another widget. We want to make a custom widget out of it. So we'll go to the library folder, we'll create new and create a new package. We'll name this UI. Okay. And in the new UI, I'll be creating a new tar file. We'll call this input field. We'll call this custom input field, and we'll say okay. Now we'll create a new, import the material. Import material.dart file, and we'll add a new class called custom input field, and we'll make this a stateless widget. Extends stateless widget, and we'll be adding the overrides, and for this we'll be taking whole of this container, and we'll copy this and we will paste this in place of this null. And I'll delete this from here. And as a child, we'll be adding the custom input field as a new widget. So I need to import this up. Import custom input field dot dart, and we need to add the locator here in the UI, and there's the custom input field. And when you save it, you can see that the result is not changed. We have taken the widget and we have decreased the complexity of the home screen, and we have taken the custom input fields up in the UI section, UI package that we have created to create custom, where we can create custom widgets of our choice. Okay, so now the problem is that we have created this custom widget that does have an icon and a username, and these fields will change accordingly where we'll be using this this custom widget. So what we want to do is, in the custom input fields, we'll add a constructor called custom input field, and here we'll be creating some variables. For the icon, I'll create a default icon called field icon. I'll create a new text to replace the username. I'll make this a string called hint text, and I'll be initializing them in the constructor, this dot field icon and this dot hint text. You can use the default way, where you pass the values in the constructor and then assign them in the constructor body. So I'm just using the shorthand in the Dart2 for assigning the values to the fields of your class. Okay, so now in here, where we're using the custom values like the icon here, I'll be changing the icon to field icon, and the hint text to hint text. Okay, so I think there is some error. Okay, so in the main.dart file, we need to add both these values here. So we'll be adding the first value, the field icon. So in this case, I'll be adding a new icon that displays the icon of person, and with the color of colors.white, and the second field of username. Okay, so we'll be adding another field. So I just copy paste the code here and I reformat it, and now there does not need to be a semicolon. So in place of username, I'll use password, and in place of person, what can we use? We can use a lock to display the password type of. So when I save this, you can see that we have the input fields here. So right now you can see that the input fields are kind of mushed together. So we don't like such sort of design. This is not a good design. So when we set in the main.dart file, when in the column we set the main axis alignment to center, it takes all the elements in the current main axis, that is the y-axis for the column, and it mushes them to, it just forces them to be in the center. And we don't want this. We want this to be spread evenly across the height of the container. So in the place of center, we want to use main axis alignment dot space evenly. So when I save this, you can see that the input fields do have a lot of space between them, and when we'll be adding the new elements, so they all will be spaced evenly. So for one thing, I do want to decrease the height of the container in this height of the center container. I want the height to be 300 only, and I want to decrease the height of the text input fields also. So in the text input fields, where we have the container, we have the width of 200, and I want to add the height of 60. And you can see that 60 is a bit much. I'll just decrease this to 40. No, 40 is kind of too less. 50. Okay, I'll just keep this at 60. There is some sort of error. Okay, so 60 seems fine. It's kind of less bulky. So I'll be adding a new button for submitting the username and password. So for this, I'll be going down to the main.dart file, and here in the column, in the children array, we'll be adding a new child here that will be of type raised button. So a raised button is sort of a material button that does have some elevation to it. So for right now, we do not want to perform any activity when the button is pressed, but if we want to see the material sort of ink design, that when we press the button, the ink kind of floats around it, so ink ripples. So that kind of ripple effect is requires an on-press method. It does not work when you don't have any on-press method there. So for the raised button, I'll add the color of colors dot deep orange, was it? Deep orange. Okay, so I'll just save this and we'll see how the button looks like. Okay. Yeah. So this is the button here. It does not have any text around it, and it's kind of small in size. So to resize the button, I'll just be okay. I don't know why the hinting is not working. So I'll just be cutting this button from here. I'll cut this from here, and I'll be adding a new container. So I'll give the container a width of 150, and I'll be adding the button as the child. So when I save it now, in the emulator, you can see the button is sort of has been resized horizontally, so it's now having much bigger width than it had initially. So now I'll be adding some text to it. So the text color I'll set to colors.white, and I'll be adding a new child to the raised button that will be a text, and it will say log in. Okay, so this text for now, if I run the app, you can see that the text is kind of so small here. So I do want to add some style to this text, and I'll add some style, text style, and I'll keep this text style to be what do you want this to look like? We want to set the size first, font size to 15. No, 15 will be too less. 20.0. And when we save it and run here, you can see that the login is having nice text in the middle. It is a raised button, so it does have some shadow here. So now what we want to do is we want to round the corners of this login button. Okay, so now for adding some sort of curved edges to this button, what we want to do is in the raised button, there is another property. In the raised button, there is a shape property. So the shape property is kind of, we can give it an oval sort of shape. You can see that there are several different type of rounded rectangle border, border directional, and this. We'll be using the rounded rectangle border. And this will be giving the border radius of border radius dot all of radius circular 10.0. So when you save this, you can see that the icon is having some sort of a rounded border around it. Okay, so now when we have these rounded corners to the button, now what we want to do is we want to add an image up above here. So in the original example, you can see that there is a round circle around the image. We'll be creating that sort of effect here also. So for adding the images, you can also create, let me delete this folder for now. Okay, so in the Flutter underscore login, that is the root directory of your project. I'll be creating a new directory. I'll call this images, that directory that you saw earlier. So I just wanted to explain it to you. So in the images, I'll be using the sort of logo, the Flutter logo. I'll just copy this, and in the images, I'll just paste it with the Flutter dash logo name, flutter-logo.png. And now we cannot directly use all the assets in the application directly. So what we want to do is we want to mention them in this pubspec.yaml file, pubspec.yaml. So in this is sort of a file that is the equivalent of a build file in the Android. It's sort of the equivalent. So here we're provided with the name of the application, the description, the version, the environment, and all these things. Whenever you want to add the dependencies to your application, to your Flutter project, like HTTP or RxDart or anything else, the higher level APIs. So for that purposes, you want to first add them as a dependency here. So these are development dependencies, and when you scroll down, there is under the Flutter section, under the user material design, there is this assets tag. So we want to add our images to this under this assets tag. Like you can see, there are some dummy images already being added here. So all the assets you want to define using this dash in the front. This dash is sort of a prefix for the Flutter. You can see it in the demos also. So with this dash, press space and then add the directory that you just added here. So with the images dash, the asset that you want to use, that is flutter-logo.png. Okay, so there is some hot reload error. So in this case, you want to just press package get. Okay, so I found the error. That was it. So while uncommenting the code, I just added another space here. So as you can see, this is the original file, and when I save it, it runs perfectly. There is no issue in that. But whenever you add a certain space to it, and when you save it, you will see that there is some sort of error here. So as this is an asset file, it's a YAML file, so the spaces do matter a lot. You can see that the U and A do not have that same indentation. So what you want to do is just clear that space and then press Control Save, and your application will build successfully. So I'll just save this application, and I have successfully imported the images, that is flutter-logo, and I'll go to the widget.test and I'll just close it. I don't know why it was open there. So in the main.dart file, I'll just get dependencies. There is no dependency, but I just don't want this bar here. Okay, so now in the children of the column, I'll be adding an image dot asset and the name of the file flutter-logo in the images. I'll be providing the path here, like in the pubspec YAML, images dash flutter-logo.png, and at this point, comma, when I save the application and the reloading completes, in the emulator, you can see that there is an error. This is a type of an error in Flutter. So there are yellow and black lines here. So what they indicate is that there is not enough space to render all the other elements, as the logo is taking so much space. Because the logo is of higher resolution, so we have to provide the width and the height here to limit the boundaries of the logo, the image. And when we save it now, you can see that there is the logo. So at this point in the column, all the elements are sort of aligned in the center, so there is not much space between them. So what we want to do is we want to provide the same kind of circle on the logo that we had in the demo. So for that, I'll be surrounding this image with a new widget that is going to be of the type material. Okay, so sorry. So in the material, as you saw earlier, there is a property of border radius. So the border, I'll give this of around 50. Oh, so for the border, we want the border radius dot all dot radius dot circular 50.0. As I save it, and we can see now that there is a circle around the logo, but at this point the logo is kind of protruding out of the material. So what we want to do is we want to add decrease the size of the logo. We'll give this a size of 80 and save it. And when we reload the sizes of it has the size of the logo decreased. So what we want to do is we want to add some padding to the logo. At this point, I'll add the padding of 8, and when the reload completes, you can see that the material is surrounding the logo, and there is nice padding around the logo. And we also would like to, this material does not have the same shadow effect that all the other elements of the screen have. So what we want to do is we want to add elevation of, we say 10.0, and save. And as the reload completes, we can see that there is nice shadow to this element. So at this point, all the elements are kind of mushed together. So what we want to do is we want to increase the height of the container, the root container. So I'll make this 400 and save that again. And you can see that all the elements are now nicely centered around in the screen with equal distance between each other. So what now? What we want to do is we want to add that circle, that semi or quarter circle in the top region of the application. So, okay, so for this, what we want to do is all the elements, we want the circle to be stacked behind all the other elements of this screen. So basically we want to add a stack to the layout so that all the centered elements of the screen are in the forefront, and all the circles and all the effects, other effects that we want to add in the background, sort of stay in the background. So what we will do is I'll just cut this. Okay, what I will do is I'll just wrap the center with a new widget, and we'll call this stack. The stack does take children, so what I'll do is I'll cut all this container. Okay, all this center, and where does it end? It ends here. I'll just cut the center, and I'll add the children property, and in children I'll add the center. Okay, so there is completely at all no change in the application at this point, because we have not added any other child to the stack. So in the stack, in the children, before the center, I'll be adding a new material. So this material will contain child. This material will contain a container that will be of size we'll say width of 500. No, we'll keep this 400 and a height of 400 also. So basically this material will take the width and height of its child, and hence we're explicitly providing the height and width of to the container, so the material will inherit will have those properties of the child. Okay, so at this point, if I save this, so you can see that there is a huge box, ugly box behind the screen. What we want to do is we want to set the color of the material, colors.ragb, color.from RGBO. The reds will provide 255, 255, and blue 255, and the opacity of 0.4. And now when I save this and the reload completes, you can see that this is a circle, but it does have a dim opacity. So now what we'll be doing is we'll be adding the border to the material, and for the border all, we'll be providing a radius circular of 200. So why have I chosen this 200? You can see that it is a perfect circle now, because the container was having the width of 400 and a height of 400, so it was a perfect square. So for this square, if we want to round all the edges, we sort of want to have the radius that could cover half the width and half the height. So for half the width and half the height, we have 200 here, which sort of gives this material a rounding feel. Okay, so here comes the main part, that what we want to do is that we want to adjust this circle sort of in this column here, and this at the top left corner of the screen. So we can take a lot of approaches for this concept, but we want to rather use a simpler one. For this material, I'll be covering this material, I'll be surrounding this material with a new element, that is the align, and this align will take a new child and we'll add the material here. So this align element, there is an error. Okay, so let me reload the application. Okay, so now we have a nice centered material circle by using the align. So align does have many more properties, like alignment, width factor, and width height. So what width factor and width height will do, width factor and height factor would do, is that they will, whatever value we pass to the height factor, it will take that value, like we pass here 0.5, and we'll pass the width factor a value of 0.5. So what they will do is, when we set an alignment, like for example we set an alignment of bottom, I'll set the alignment alignment dot bottom right. So why have I set this alignment to bottom right? Well, we want the circle to be shown on the top left corner. So this align is not relevant to that alignment factor that we see in other widgets. So at this point, what this align is doing is, it is aligning the circle in using the width factor and height factor to this portion of the circle, the bottom right portion of this material widget. This align will be focusing its alignment to the bottom right corner of this material child, and will be cutting its width and its height, will be multiplying its width and its height to the factors that we have entered here. For example, for the 400 width and 400 height, this align will be multiplying, being a parent, this align will only show 200 by 200 portion of this material, that is this one, and we'll be aligning it to the bottom right. So let me see, when we save this, we have this sort of effect here. So at this point, what it is doing is this align widget. What it is doing, it is taking the bottom right corner of the material circle, and it's dividing, it's multiplying the total height and width of the material with the width factor and the material factor, width factor and the height factor, and it is presenting the results on the screen. And the reason why this is being shown on the top left corner is because it is the starting of the screen, so we're not doing anything extra for that. So I hope you understand this, because whenever you try and experiment with this align, and you'll understand it in a much better way. So this is kind of those widgets which behave differently when it is being used with other widgets. So you will have to experiment a lot to get this right. So for example, if I do this 0.6 and 0.6, you'll see that the size of the circle increases on the top left corner. You can see this here. So I hope you'll understand this when you'll experiment this on your own. So at this point, we have a basic app, and there was another circle at the top right corner. I'll leave this as an assignment for you to experiment with the align and use this property in a much better way in your apps. So now we have a user text fields. We have a separate widget for that, custom input field that you can use in your applications, and a login button that is a raised button, and an image. So in this tutorial, you learned how to import images, how to use text fields, and how to use the align widget to kind of crop or show a particular part of your underlying widget. Okay, so I hope you learned a lot in this video, and I would end the session here, and see you next time.